Thank the member. The question is the bill we now read a second time. I call the member for Ryde.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise in support of the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill 2024, a crucial step towards improving the rental landscape for the people of New South Wales. This bill is especially relevant to my electorate of Ryde, where the proportion of renters is steadily increasing. In an electorate that has seen significant housing developments in areas like Meadowbank and Macquarie Park, ensuring fair and clear rules for renters is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. This bill sets out to amend the Residential Tenancies Act 2010 by making the following key changes. Firstly, to ensure that residential tenants are offered a convenient and free way to pay their rent. At a recent community barbecue in Marsfield, I was appalled by the number of residents complaining that the only practical way to pay their rent was via an app that charged a processing fee. These fees add to the overall cost of living and are an example of, excuse the irony, rent-seeking at its best. Secondly, to ensure that prospective tenants cannot be charged for background checks. Again, there is a cost associated with this process, and while some landlords may desire a background check, the onus should not be on a tenant to pay for the privilege of being considered for a rental property. These costs are unnecessary and have rightly been abolished. Third, the bill seeks to enable residential tenants to obtain consent to keep animals and to set out the grounds for a landlord to refuse that consent. This is crucial. Australia is one of the highest pet-owning countries anywhere in the world. However, we have some of the least pet-friendly laws. I have expressed my concern many times that as government continues to propose high-rise living as a silver bullet for housing affordability, insufficient work has been done to make that style of living realistic and sustainable. It is an important first step to acknowledge that pets are often a crucial part of any family, but more must be done, which I will speak about in more detail. Fourth, the bill seeks to require a landlord to have a valid reason to end a residential tenancy. This is to abolish the notion of no grounds eviction and is a necessary reform to inject fairness to a system that has evolved significantly. Many people are now lifelong or long-term renters, and as property markets continue to rise, it is unconscionable that many people who have made a community their home for years have been unceremoniously evicted without grounds. Unscrupulous landlords do the calculations and realise that more money can be made by finding a brand new tenant without expectations, rather than negotiating a higher rent with an incumbent tenant. This is a welcome reform, especially in my electorate of Ryde. Fifth, the bill seeks to specify the grounds on which a landlord may terminate a residential tenancy by termination notice. In place of no grounds, it sets out a prescribed list of grounds which are, on balance, are fair and reasonable. For example, were a tenant to breach their lease agreement, the property is sold or requires significant renovation, or the landlord wishes to reside at the premises, then a tenant can have their lease terminated. I've long advocated for these changes and am pleased to see them introduced in this legislation. However, I would note Part E of Schedule 1 in brackets 12 references, quote, the premises are required for key worker housing. I would be grateful if in the Minister's response he could clarify or provide a real-world example of how this particular ground could be invoked by a landlord. Specifically, under what legislative instrument or regulation could a premises be required for such a use? I expect that this must have arisen in the course of consultation with the stakeholders and would find value in you elaborating on how this arose and by which stakeholders. Sixth, the bill seeks to limit rent increases to once every 12 months. For periodic leases or fixed-term leases of 2 years or more, this is a useful step for renters. It provides a long line of sight for future increases and a degree of predictability that allows families and individuals to plan and budget. This was something that was raised repeatedly this time last year when I held Ryde's first ever rental forum, and I strongly welcome the change. 7, 8 and 9 relates to offences for wrongly giving a termination notice, specifying when tenants can vacate after a termination notice but before the termination date, and to make the Rental Commissioner a member of the Rental Bond Board. These are welcome clarifications and initiatives that will help people in my electorate better understand their rights and to navigate the rental system. One key aspect of this bill which is relevant to my electorate is the clarification of rules around pet ownership. For too long, the question of whether tenants can have pets has been a grey area, leading to disputes between landlords and renters. In Ryde, there are many families, singles and retirees living in rental properties. these reforms are a welcome step towards bringing clarity and fairness. The reforms clarify that a tenant who has entered into a rental agreement may keep an animal at the premises with the landlord's consent. The law will require the landlord to provide a written response within 21 days, either approving or refusing the application. No response within 21 days is to be treated as consent, meaning that these laws will err on the side of the pet owner in the case of an unresponsive landlord. For those who receive a refusal, there must be reasonable grounds, such as an unreasonable number of animals, unsuitable premises for the welfare of the animal, or a high risk of property damage. This is in line with other jurisdictions and is a welcome step. However, it appears as though there remains opportunities for strata schemes to impose overly zealous restrictions, which to the unknowing tenant could cause them to believe that they are not permitted to keep a pet. We must do better as a parliament, especially for those living in apartments, to clarify these rules. And I encourage the government to be ambitious in its reforms to strata properties and ensure we don't create separate classes of tenants dictated by whether one lives in a house or a unit. While this bill introduces critical protections, it does not address one of the root causes of the pressures in the rental market, which of course is supply. More regulation alone cannot bring down rents, and one solution lies in reducing the number of vacant investment properties. These properties are available now, they don't require DAs, they don't require a workforce, they're already built, and their introduction to the rental market would not upset the sensibilities of local community amenity or create undue pressure on surrounding infrastructure. I've previously called on this Parliament to reduce the attractiveness of retaining vacant properties. Instead of buying and renting homes to locals, some will park their money and wait for the market to rise. In doing so, they remove much needed rental properties from the market, driving up prices for everybody and undermining public confidence in a planning system that becomes too focused on new development rather than the efficient use of current development. While this would not be a complete fix, it is something and it's fast. It's time we looked at measures to make it more difficult for investors to keep those properties vacant, ensuring that housing is used for people, not for speculation. And finally, Speaker, I note that there is still much more work to be done. Rental reform alone will not solve the problems that renters face. We must also look at strata and building reform to ensure that improved rental conditions are not undermined by poor building quality or unscrupulous strata management. In Ryde, where apartment living is becoming the norm, we've heard too many stories of poorly built developments, leaks, structural defects and other issues that make life extremely difficult for renters and owners alike. Additionally, strata management issues, including exorbitant fees and mismanagement, place unnecessary burdens on residents. If we want to make renting a more sustainable option, we need to couple tenancy reforms with better oversight of strata managers and stricter building standards. This bill is an important step in the right direction, but it cannot be the last step. It's time to build a rental market that offers stability, fairness and opportunity for everyone, whether they rent by choice or by necessity. I commend the bill to the House.
I think